Fantasy Brains!
Welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Brains podcast, and I am thrilled to bring you guys this episode today, as it is episode 10 of the 32-team series. Now, if you have not been with us for episodes 1 through 9, the 32-team series is where I am going through all 32 NFL teams and analyzing them from a fantasy football perspective. So we're going to be looking at all of their offenses and the fantasy relevant players on their offenses and project them. We're going to be looking at stuff, as you can see to my right here on the fantasy whiteboard, stuff like the depth chart changes from last year to this year, the fantasy football forecast, which includes projecting how all these players are going to finish in comparison to where they are currently being drafted. We're going to be looking at their strength of schedule per position group, as well as their fantasy playoff schedule, which includes those weeks 15, 16, and 17 games. And then we're going to finish it off with some interesting storylines that could change the course of the season. Now, before we get started with this video, make sure to follow us on all of our social medias. You can get us on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, at Leatherbrains. And then you can find us on YouTube at Leatherbrains Podcast. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and also check out all of our past content. We got some fantasy film breakdowns on there with the rookies from this past draft class. We got some dynasty episodes. We got some real life NFL episodes. And we got, of course, episodes 1 through 9 of this 32 team series. So definitely make sure to go check out our channel. And then you can find the audio version of all of our podcasts on Spotify. Now today, I'm very excited, like I said, to bring you this episode because we are going to be talking about the Tennessee Titans. So we just did the Colts last episode, who projected, in my opinion, to be the worst team in the division. But the Titans are the other team that could be projected the worst in this AFC South division. So I'm very excited to talk about them. Now let's look at this quarterback room. We have Cam Ward, who gets taken number 1 overall out of Miami. And Cam Ward is a player that I just want to see play football right now. I think he is not getting enough hype. In the past 15 years, I've never seen a number 1 overall pick get less media attention than Cam Ward. I mean, look at what he did last year with Miami. I mean, he didn't lead them to the playoffs because he lost to my Syracuse Orange in the Dome in the last week of the season, which pushed him out of the playoffs, but throwing for over 4,000 yards, over 30 touchdowns, leading this Miami team to one of their best seasons in recent memory. And then he goes number 1 overall easily to the Tennessee Titans, where there was a lot of talk they were going to trade out, maybe take a guy like Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, but they stick and they take Cam Ward, who is a gunslinger of a player. He has rushing upside and a player that is going to be very interesting and I think a little bit underdrafted in fantasy football, but he will obviously, of course, be backed up by Will Levis. And then looking at the running back room, it's going to be the same room as last year. You have Tony Pollard, who totaled about 1,300 yards last year with a surprising 40 catches as well as 5 touchdowns. Now, the catches just surprises you because you expected their other running back, Tyjae Spears, to really come in and take that receiving role. Whereas Spears last year, and he only played about 12 to 13 games, he had 500 total yards, 30 catches, and 5 touchdowns. So this is going to be a very interesting running back dynamic this year. I do still really like both these players. Spears is still at the end of his rookie contract. Tony Pollard is coming into year 2 out of his 3-year contract. So these are both players who you don't know what their future entails. You don't know if either of these guys are going to be the starting back on this team next year. So they are both playing for their contracts. And I'm truly excited about this running back room because I think the most underrated part about this team and of this offseason as a whole is how the Titans have been building around Cam Ward. Now, I don't think that they are going to have a Commanders type season like Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn were able to do last season. But I think it's going to be very similar where people are underrating Cam Ward and they're underrating the most important part of the offense, which is protecting your quarterback. You already have Peter Skoronski at your left guard, first round pick from 2 years ago, getting better every season. You have JC Latham, who comes in as the right tackle, 7th overall pick from last season. Again, another ascending player. And then you add 3 players in free agency. You add Lloyd Cushenberry, center from the Denver Broncos. You add the right guard, 34-year-old Kevin Zeitler, who is not, going to be there for a long time, but he's going to be great for this season. And then you add Dan Moore at left tackle, who all Steelers fans out there will tell you is trash. But at the end of the day, he's still going to be better than what they had last season. So you actually have, in my opinion, a average to potentially above average O-line. And I think that's really going to help this Titans team and help Cam Ward get settled into this offense. Now, I think where there's a lot of comparison with the Commanders team from last year is looking at the receiver room, where you only really have one proven guy. You have Calvin Ridley coming off a okay season, 64 catches, 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And then you have Tyler Lockett, who signs from Seattle. Last year, he had 50 catches, 600 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, Tyler Lockett is not great. He's turning 33 in 1 month, coming up towards the end of his career. So I'm not too excited about him. And then you have two rookies. You have Elic Ayomanor, a player that I absolutely love, round 4 pick in the NFL draft this year from Stanford. He is your typical X receiver. So he's very similar to Calvin Ridley, which is why I think that he could have a good year this year. But I think his future really lies on in about 2 years when Ridley could be off this team. And then you have Chimere Dike, who's another round 4 pick from Florida. So though you have two rookies coming in day 4, and you also have Xavier Restrepo, who is Cam Ward's teammate, undrafted free agent, but you have to give him the respect because not only did he play with Cam Ward, but he also is a slot receiver, which this team is currently lacking. So with Nick Westbrook-Akine and Tyler Boyd leaving from last season, that leaves about 120 vacated targets and about 10 touchdowns from a Will Levis-led offense. So definitely excited to see what this receiver room can do. And looking at the tight end room, you have Chig Okonkwo, been there for a couple of years now. He had about 52 catches for 470 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. Nothing special. He's nothing special as a player, to be honest with you. But they also did draft Gunnar Helm, tight end out of Texas in round 4, who I think could really start to eat into Okonkwo's value. And I think by the start of next season could be the starting tight end on this roster. But let's get into the meat of this episode with the fantasy football forecast. So I have the Titans passing for about 3,400 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 310 completions. So I think Cam Ward's going to have a really good year. I mentioned it earlier. I think Cam Ward is a fantastic player. When I look at Cam Ward, I see shades of Patrick Mahomes. I see shades of Justin Herbert, a quarterback who can make any throw on the field, a little bit more nonchalant with it, of course, which I personally don't like when I watch him. But I do think he has all the talent in the world to succeed. And on top of that, he has a rushing upside, similar to guys like Mahomes and Herbert, where he's not going to be a rushing threat. He's not going to have design plays for him, but he's going to be a guy that'll give you 400 rush yards on the season and maybe, around 30 a week or something like that, and give you a couple extra points, as opposed to some of those quarterbacks like Michael Penix Jr. or Matthew Stafford or Jared Goff, who are going to give you 0 rush yards per week. So definitely something interesting to look at Cam Ward. I think a lot of people are writing him off right now because he's a rookie. And it did surprise me because Cam Ward, he's being drafted right now as the quarterback 21 in all drafts. I actually have him as my quarterback 24. But I've mentioned this in the past few episodes. All my quarterbacks, from quarterbacks like 9 to 20 to 24 in that range, are all separated by such little points that Cam Ward could easily end up as a quarterback 14 or 15 on the season. Now, I do think his ceiling is capped as a player because of the limited weapons and because he's a rookie. But I do think with his play style and with his talent, I think people should give him a little bit more credit for this season than people currently are. And I think you're going to have a very high expected pass volume because they're going to be down in so many games this year. The Titans are going to be a bad team. I think they're going to finish 3rd in the division, just ahead of the Colts, and they're probably going to be picking top 10 again in the NFL draft. So I think it's going to be a very high passing volume offense. And with Cam Ward's previous statistics, I can assume that I think this could be a more efficient team than people are giving them credit for. It's also just going to depend on what is this coaching staff led by Brian Callahan going to look like, because it obviously hasn't looked great the past few years. Looking at the receivers, Calvin Ridley is easily my favorite player to draft this year. And he's my favorite player to draft last year. And he was going last year as like the receiver 35, and he finished as the receiver 28. So he still was better than what he was getting drafted as, and people would say he had a bad season. Now, I think the biggest thing where Ridley can improve from last year is the touchdowns. He was missed on so many deep balls, and Cam Ward throws an absolutely beautiful deep ball. I talked about the improved O-line, which will give him some more time to develop some of those longer plays. So I have Calvin Ridley going for 72 catches, a little bit over 900 yards and 7 touchdowns. I think he's going to have a great year. I think, again, he's going to be one of the steals of the draft where I have him right now as my receiver 30, currently going as the receiver 32, but he could easily finish higher than wide receivers 22 to 29 or even 20 to 29. We're talking about Will Levis last year and Mason Rudolph producing Ridley as a top 30 receiver. I just can't see how that's going to get worse with Cam Ward when they didn't bring in anyone on the receiver room that's going to be much better. And Nick Westbrook-Akine last year caught 9 touchdowns. So I think Ridley could see around 7 to 8 touchdowns this year, which is going to raise his value. And I think he'll finish as a low-end receiver 2, high-end receiver 3 in fantasy with high weekly upside. So love Calvin Ridley. If you can get him in your drafts, I think he could be similar to what Terry McLaurin did last year, where been waiting for a while for good quarterback play. Cam Ward comes in. He's going to be the top target. I think he could have a good season. Now, looking at Tyler Lockett, I have him as my receiver 67. He's going as the receiver 92. So he's very old, but he always has been reliable in his career, and he could catch some touchdowns, but I would never consider him a startable option in your regular redraft leagues. I think he's going to be a player that could have some upside if you draft Cam Ward in best ball, because Tyler Lockett goes out there and scores. He has 5 catches, 50 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But I have him finishing on the season for about 45 catches, 570 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So nothing too fantasy relevant. And that's going to be the same with pretty much every player on this team, other than the running backs and Calvin Ridley and Cam Ward. But with these receiver options, there's just so much unknown. And so when I look at the rookies on this team with 3 different rookies, my favorite is Elic Ayomanor. I don't think people will remember this, but if you go back, go watch his 2023 game against Travis Hunter. He head tapped him on a absolutely ridiculous catch for a touchdown. It was like a 40-yard touchdown when Stanford played Colorado in 2023. And I've just seen him. I saw him torch Syracuse. I've seen him torch other teams. I think he's a very underrated receiver. And I think he could start slow because, again, he plays a similar role to Calvin Ridley. But I do think that with his production in college, he definitely has the highest potential out of any of these rookie receivers, especially in your dynasty leagues, where I think he's a good stash for you if you have a deeper bench. But I have him finishing as my receiver 78 on the season. He's going as the receiver 96. So I think he is going to be a little bit better than what people are projecting him. I have him going for about 40 catches, 500 yards, and 4 touchdowns on the season, which is pretty good for a 4th-round pick, especially when you have a guy like Chimere DK who's coming out as a higher 4th-round pick on this team. I have DK going for about 30 catches, 270 yards, and 1.5 touchdowns. So I don't think DK is going to be anything crazy. And I think that's similar to somebody like Xavier Restrepo, where a lot of people are very high on him, but him being an undrafted free agent, I just can't draft him in any leagues. If you want to go ahead and stash him in, your dynasty leagues, or you want to give him a round 18 flyer in a best ball league where you drafted Cam Ward, I don't hate it, but he could easily go out there and either get cut or just give you zeros every single week. Because I think people are forgetting that he was not drafted, and the Titans drafted 2 receivers in the 4th round over him. So a lot of people love Restrepo because of what he did in Miami and the connection that he has with Ward. But you got to look at the draft capital here and understand that they did take 2 other rookie receivers before him. And so looking at the tight end room, you have Chig Okonkwo. I am low on him. He's going as the tight end 26. I have him as my tight end 33. I mentioned earlier, I think Gunnar Helm is going to come in and take a lot of those snaps away from him. And that's where you could be looking at more of a 50-50 split. So I got Okonkwo going for about 35 catches, 350 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then I have Gunnar Helm going for 25 catches, 270 yards, on a touchdown. So I think both guys are going to be pretty unplayable, but if you're looking for the higher upside option, I do like Gunnar Helm more if something happens to Okonkwo, and then all of a sudden we see a rookie-to-rookie connection with Ward and Gunnar Helm, and somehow it turns into something. Because he did play the highest level of football in the SEC, he had some productive games, and he has, like I mentioned, played a big role on an important team. So I am interested to see how this depth chart really works out, and I think that's one of the most interesting storylines is you have so many players, even in the running back room with Khalil Mullins, rookie running back out of Michigan. this team just drafted so many mediocre rookies that we just don't know who's actually going to be on the field. And I think that's why it's so hard to predict this team. But it's also why I like Cam more, because I think there are a lot of options that could potentially boom this season. And then looking at the running back room, I got the rushing offense going for about 1,900 rush yards and 15 touchdowns. So I do think they will rush at a pretty solid rate. I talked about the improved O-line. I think they had a good rushing game last year, and this team is committed to running the ball, especially with a rookie quarterback. So I got Tony Pollard going as my RB27. His ADP is RB28. Tony Pollard is a very good and consistent player. He is your basically your typical average running back. He had one of the highest yards after contact rates. And when you combine that with the improved O line play, I think he's such a safe low end RB2, high end RB3 in fantasy, where he's going to be a guy that will never give you a 30-point week, but I think you can kind of rely on him to give you a lot of 10-point weeks and can be a really good starter at your flex if you have injuries, or if your top end running backs have bye weeks, you can slide him in very confidently that you're not going to get a donut in your running back slot. So I like Pollard, and I also like Spears. I have Spears one spot after him at my RB28. And he's going as the RB40. So I'm a lot higher on Spears than the community is. And I think it's because he has a ton of reception upside with Cam Ward. I think Spears is a candidate to go for 50 catches. He had 30 catches with Will Levis last year, and he only played 12 games and was injured for some of those games. So I think with Spears coming into, his third or fourth year, I think he's a guy that could really take off in this offense, whereas Tony Pollard is a player that is more descending as opposed to ascending. So I think Spears could be a guy, a lot of reception upside. And I think he will be better in best ball because it'll be hard to really understand when to play him. But if you see the Titans are playing like the 49ers and you know that they're probably going to be losing the game, I like Spears because he could see a lot of checkdowns and end up being in the top 5 to 10 of running back receptions this season. So I think this running back room is very underrated, and it goes hand in hand with the underrated O-line and the underrated moves that this offense has made. And just the idea that in the NFL, with how bad the Titans were last year, people just have to realize that it's a complete different team this year. And it starts out with the quarterback. When you have such a better quarterback with Cam Ward, it could change a lot more than what people are currently projecting. So that's why I'm a little bit higher on the Titans to finish third in the division, or even second if all things work out, and why I like them. Now, if you look at their strength of schedule, they have the 22nd easiest schedule for quarterbacks, which lays a little bit less than middle of the pack. It's not a great schedule, but they have the easiest schedule for receivers, number one in the league, which is just more and more fire me up Calvin Ridley. They are not going to be facing a lot of tough secondaries, at least from what we saw last season and based on these statistics. But that just makes me feel so good about drafting Calvin Ridley high because he's not going to be facing a really tough schedule. When you have a player like Calvin Ridley and he's the only receiver in this offense, you know he's going to be facing the number one corner. When teams are going to be scouting out the Titans, they're going to say, hey, if we take out Ridley, who else is going to make an impact? Because there's no one else in this team right now that's proven in the receiver or the tight end room that can even consider themselves as a top 50 receiver or a top 20 tight end. So Ridley could have a lot of high target volume, but he also is going to see a lot of tough coverage, and he could see a lot of double teams. But him having the easiest schedule makes me feel a lot better about drafting him and having that upside with him as a player. Now they have the 16th easiest schedule for tight ends. And I've mentioned it in past videos. I don't read as much into the tight end matchups because you could have a lot of different players on the defensive side of the ball that could cover the tight end. But I will say, again, I'm not drafting Chig Okonkwo or Gunnar Helm in any of my redraft leagues. I think in best ball, again, if you have Cam Ward, I think it's a fine pick. And if you want to go ahead and get Gunnar Helm in your dynasty leagues, I think that's a good pick. But this offense, in terms of the tight ends, I really don't think there's much upside with these guys. And if there is, you're not going to be able to predict what week that's going to happen. Because Chig Okonkwo is one of those players where he shows that he has that speed and size combo, guys like Evan Ingram and Kyle Pitts, where he can make a really big play out of nothing, but we just have not seen that out of him in the past. And so trying to predict when that 60-yard touchdown is going to come is going to be almost near impossible. And then for the running backs, they have the 27th easiest schedule, which is also the 6th hardest. So it is a little bit concerning, but it does help me feel a little bit more confident in Tyjae Spears because it means that the running game might not be as efficient and that they might be down in some games and that you might see a little bit of a higher snap share for Tyjae Spears compared to what he saw last season, which just means more potential volume in this offense. So looking at the strength of schedule is not the biggest thing in the world, but it does give us a solid projection on how these teams that they're going to be facing are really going to turn out this season. And then looking at their playoff schedule, it's not great. You're going in San Francisco week 15 and against the Chiefs at home week 16, which are just going to be two brutal matchups. Now, I do like that they have two home games because they play the Saints week 17 at home, which is a good matchup. And Tennessee is going to be a warm place, which means that you're not going to have to go into a super snowy environment, which always helps. But the Chiefs and the 49ers are games where those two teams could easily blow out the Titans. So those running backs are not going to have a lot of standalone value. But in week 17, those guys, the Titans Saints game could be an absolute shitter of a game. And there could be more points than people are projecting with how bad these defenses could be. So I think when you look at the schedule, Ridley is really the only player, him and the running backs, that you're probably going to be starting in your redraft leagues in these playoffs. And I think we'll just have to see how those teams are looking and how the Titans are looking to really evaluate it. But looking at it from a preseason perspective, I'm not loving that playoff schedule, especially for people in best ball that are looking to correlate those last few weeks. Looking at just some miscellaneous storylines before we cap off this episode, I think just the biggest thing is, one, how do the receiver snap shares work out? I do think it's going to be Ridley, basically 100% on one side. I think you're going to see a combination of Tyler Lockett and Xavier Restrepo in the slot, potentially Chimere Dike as well. And then I think the other outside slot is going to be either Lockett or Ayomanor. And I think Ayomanor will win that slot. So it's not going to be something that we really know until the depth charts come out here in training camp, but it is going to be very interesting to see because in your regular redraft leagues, whoever that Titans wide receiver 2 is could have some standalone value that you might be able to pick up on the waiver wire in the early weeks of the season. And then the only other storyline that's really important is how good is this defense going to be? Because if the defense is solid, then they'll stay in games and the rushing volume will still be there because they're not going to get game scripted out. But if the Titans defense is trash, that ups Cam Ward a lot. It ups Calvin Ridley and the rest of the receivers, and it ups Tyjae Spears because it means that they're probably going to forego the run if they're down by 15 points in the second quarter, if their defense is giving up a lot of points, which could be possible with how much capital they spent on the offense during this offseason. So the Titans are going to be a fun team. I'm very excited to see them play, and I'm just very excited for the football season. We're coming in at about 6 weeks till the season starts, and I just cannot wait. You can only project so many things before really knowing how it's all going to turn out on the field. So hopefully you guys all enjoyed this episode of the Fantasy Brains podcast. Now, again, make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts on X, on Instagram, on TikTok at Leatherbrains. Make sure to also go to our YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button. And you can find the audio version of all of our podcasts on Spotify. Let us know in the comments if you enjoyed this one and what other things you would like to see in future episodes. Go check out our last episode with the Indianapolis Colts and stay tuned for our next episode, which will be the Jacksonville Jaguars, also known as episode 11 of the 32 team series, where we're about a third of the way through. Hopefully you all enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.